Okay, this is now your opportunity to ask questions of this distinguished panel in terms of anything that they spoke about or anything else on your mind related to space industry and what it might mean for South Australia. There are microphones that will be going around the room, so please raise your hand if you have a question, and when you do, please say your name and your affiliation, and then come up with your question, and we'll have this illustrious team here answer your questions. And I have a few, but I don't want to take away from your time. So if you don't have any questions, I can start going, but please go ahead.
Pretty scary. Rob, first again, Rob Dickinson, Hydrocity Systems. The main thing that comes to my mind in terms of what might be an opportunity for South Australia is space junk. South Australia hasn't contributed to the space junk problem yet. I have no idea whether the rest of the world would be willing to pay South Australia to clean up its space junk. Is that an opportunity? I don't know.
May I? Well, now you are addressing, thanks for the question, because you are addressing a problem which is a global problem, which definitely exists, and I think I will be sharing, at least on the European side, the answer with Eric, because both the European Space Agency that he represents and the European industry that I'm representing are working on this topic, because we are reflecting on clean space, which is a need at global level. You may be aware that the European Union tried to have several years ago an attempt to have an adhesion at global level to a code of conduct, how that was called, also with the objective to preserve space. It has been a bit difficult because to have a global agreement, you've seen how it is difficult on the climate and how it is unstable also because there are changes and what has been agreed changed after that. But we have to take care of our planet. And it is very clear, we also worked on the fact that some materials are going to be banned. As representative of industry, I have to say that clearly we are ready to do our part, but if we do in isolation and we have a competitive disadvantage, we are not pleased at all. And this has to be understood, because we cannot be the good boy if we have to make profit. And as I showed with our data, competitive market, the commercial market is vital for us, because the institutional one is just a bit more than half, and the rest. So we have also a responsibility as industry. But nevertheless, the topic exists, is very important, and we are working on the issue of debris mitigation, and we hope that together with the European Space Agency at the next council and ministerial level, there may be the opportunity to have a program devoted to clean space. We are studying infrastructure which could clean space, capturing satellites or pieces. We are working on debris mitigation, and we are reflecting on these opportunities also because we understood that the demand for this, especially now with the many constellations of which we have been talking, may increase also significantly with the number of satellites which are around and which can reach their end of life. So therefore, even if it is not immediate, but it is also clear that there may be a commercial market which may be of interest also of countries which have a responsibility but don't have a technology. So today we are trying to start with an institutional support, also with a perspective to serve a global market. So we are active on this and we will be taking care.
Eric or Steve? Eric or Steve, do you have any?
Maybe you can just
have
to push the arrow. No. First, it is a very serious problem. Extremely serious one, and a threat on all the satellites around us. Exactly like was said by Giuseppe, initiatives have been taken by ESA. We are those initiatives goes in two directions. First, don't create additional debris. So that is today a fundamental requirement for all the missions of the agency. Don't create additional debris. Therefore, you have to design your spacecraft in a way that they will not create additional debris. Second, for the debris that are there, how can we clean it? By the way, there is also a link between a clean space and in-orbit servicing, because for both you need to go up there. So of course you can imagine to link the two. There are initiatives in Europe, but there are initiatives in other countries around the world, because this is a problem for all nations having something up there. So what can Australia do in this respect? Then I don't know. This will be quite a very ambitious program.
The big issue is these super tiny particles at very high velocities. And so the game is to avoid any further collisions in space. So today, so the point of getting this stuff out of there is to avoid a future collision. Yes. And the needs today are tracking the things that are already up there, and to be able to build what they call as a catalog, which is really the flight pattern of all the debris that exists today. That's where I think there's perhaps an opportunity for South Australia, just because of its geography, as a sensor or a location for sensors that might enable that kind of either optical or radar to help with that mapping process, which, as I said, is a global issue. So the more sensors you have, the more geographically dispersed they are, the better. And then, of course, there's the opportunity of integrating everything together in some kind of big data system, so you can develop those tracks. But yeah, the game is to avoid any future collisions. I don't know if we can ever be able to track the kind of microparticles that are already up there, but we don't want to create any more, for sure.
Great. And I'm just going to add one thing in terms of from a South Australian perspective. As a money guy, the space junk issue, the business case has never been there. Because of just the enormous amount of cost that would be able to get in there, and the potential benefit that you get back from that, who would pay for it. Yeah, and then, at some point the business case there. So it's interesting to me as, from a South Australia perspective, of South Australia try to focus on what are more of the near-term opportunities that they have an opportunity or a niche they get into. But I actually see space junk as a potential long-term, high payoff, but high risk right now that you could invest a lot into it and you're not going to get anything out of it. It may be something that South Australia could invest a little bit on, thinking of the far term. It's like, hey, this isn't something that we're going to benefit right now, but maybe we can position ourselves for something that's 15, 20 years down the road, and we'll be ready to take advantage when the business case is still there. Yeah, something to think about.
And inherently governmental.
Yes.
It's not a private. I don't see it as a commercial thing.
Next question.
Bradley Abraham from Australia Science Channel. So, if you were advising our new space agency, knowing what you know about Australia's capabilities, where would you be advising the space agency to be spending its early? What would it be targeting for some of its shorter-term aims and objectives for project work, or what are the niche industries, niche areas that Steve might have referred to earlier? What do you think those could be for South Australia, or Australia in general?
Well, if I can say something, I would concentrate on the needs of Australia first. And when you look Australia, there are two elements that are very visible. First, you are surrounded by the sea, so everything related to better knowledge of the sea around the continent. And second, it's an extremely large country with a small population. So it seemed obvious that the question of link to Earth observation, telecommunication, positioning are elements that are extremely relevant for Australia. So if you, I'm not there to give free advices, but certainly the first priority is to link to the needs, and the needs are about the knowledge of the management of your environment and the question of security that was underlined this morning by the Minister of Defense Industry. And he was very clear about what he was intending to do also in space for security. But those are just a few remarks. Huh?
And building on what Eric has just been saying, I think that there is a huge demand everywhere, and so that can apply to Australia as well in terms of application. Eric addressed the issue of telecom, navigation, and Earth observation. But a lot of additional application can come from the integration of all these. And security is a classical example of that, because at the end, you can use Earth observation system to have the situation of a territory, but you can use not only optical, you can use also radar, so you can have day and night type of data. You could integrate satellite data with in situ data locally. But after that, it is important to have the availability of all these, not only in remote headquarters in Canberra or whatever, but in the theater. And to have this in the theater of operation, where there may be an emergency or something like that, it's important to have the availability on wideband, but not only in fixed areas, but also on mobile. And so telecommunication become an enabler for all that. And after this, it is clear that the combination with navigation data and localization open enormous opportunity in this country as in the rest of the world. Earlier in the civilized part, but the rest of the countries will follow, it is clear that we are going towards driverless car utilization. So the infrastructure for that has to be prepared, because driverless car will not be only in big cities, they will be everywhere. So it's important to think of Internet of Things, which has been quoted a couple of times today, because we will have, in any case, worldwide, more objects than people connected, and they will exchange data. So it's important to have the capacity to transfer huge amount of data and to process them. And that is something which the space industry can take advantage of, pushed this time by the IT industry and not the other way around, as it's been so far. That is, the space world has been trying to sell services complementing what the terrestrial operators or telecom couldn't do. So plenty of opportunities definitely in terms of application. Think also of what the algorithm or change management can do for whatever change. In terms of mapping, from the cadastral application and be always up to date to all sort of things in terms of monitoring of coast, but also of what is happening on the land. Air will not be only the place for planes with a pilot, but will be also a place where there will be drones. Drones have to communicate as well, and we have to communicate with drones and control them. So it is definitely a world which is changing, and where also space will become very close, let's say, to the area of atmosphere with a lot of things in common. So all these are areas which are definitely useful, and from space you can look at the Earth and provide value for society.
If you, my suggestion is, I think that the unique capability or the unique opportunity Australia has is its geography. And I think that is the niche that if I was in your situation, I'd look at. Either sensors on the ground or ground stations that, I mean, the data's got to come down somewhere. You're in a very high interest location right now on the globe, and you have the geography. To me, that's where I would start, is there, rather than on the space segment side.
Okay. Question? Sir.
We used the term space junk before, which is...
Your name and affiliate?
Oh, sorry, Paul Tulliangus, Core Energy. So we're a small energy intelligence firm. We talked about space junk, a little bit negative. If we talk about space storage optimization as more of a positive, is there scope for us to contemplate an ability for space to be a storage mechanism, either in transition or longer term, for waste of the type we're trying to deal with across the economy? And I contemplate things like nuclear waste. This state has a history in looking recently at whether we can provide a repository for nuclear waste. Can we contemplate ways of using space to deal with some of the transitional challenges of managing various products of our lives and use space as an interim or long-term solution?
Thoughts, gentlemen?
I think the barrier you have to wait for is for launch prices to get way, way down. Then it might provide that kind of a capability. But up till now, the cost of getting things up there has just been prohibitive for those kinds of issues.
Indeed, even let's say with progress of technology, we can think of it remains a challenge. Today, there are a lot of things that could be done in space, generating value, but some, may still have a market because of a great value that they generate. I'm thinking, for instance, of the production of crystals in absence of microgravity. That, for semiconductor, is something which makes a complete difference in terms of quality and performance that you can have out there. But it is unlimited what could be done in space. Think that should it be possible to have somebody which has got his skin fired because of a fire, and you could have him in space, the fact that he would be floating and not just on the sheet on a bed is something that would recreate the possibility to have skin again in a fantastic situation. It would be not dramatic as it is on Earth, but it is impossible to bring a human. I think to bring waste would be even definitely far away. On the other side, space could be considered, that's maybe an idea you could reflect on, as a data farm, a data storage area, because space is a safe place. Let's think of that.
Scale tends to change cost structure. So if you contemplate a world in which all these things happen all the time, we've got in the future 10 million people doing stuff, could we contemplate a world in which it is affordable to do business?
I always contemplate a world that's possible for doing these things at some point. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's what I taught. I think there are those wild-ass crazy things that someday, actually, the case will be there. And how do you position yourself for being the ones that takes advantage of that? You know, I'm not a smart guy to think about those things, but there are a lot of people out there that invest their time and their capital and money. If you were at the IAC last night, and Bill Nye talked about sails, solar sails, for propulsion in that, and you know, it's a crazy idea. It doesn't necessarily make sense now, but someday that may be the way we progress. So I don't want to actually, drop it, but it's interesting. To me, the technology and the business case, particularly you talked about nuclear waste, is interesting that even if the business case was there, and technology was there, I'm not sure the political would be there. And so as we're talking about all these issues and everything, we can't forget that politics and the political aspect of everything we do is going to be an important aspect of all of this. Yeah.
But it is clear
Question?
that the main problem, as I said, but still the main problem is the price of 1 kilo in orbit. And what we do, all the efforts today is to reduce it by half, reduce by 10%, by 20%. But that is something, but it is not bringing that to an affordable price for ventures like the one you are mentioning. And we are still waiting for the one that will invent, that will come with a new idea that will reduce the cost really dramatically. If you have an idea, please, you are welcome.
Other questions? Question over there, sir.
Steve Schmid, I am a business advisor with Oz Industries Entrepreneurs Program, so very relevant for this discussion. And also, David, proud alum of Carnegie Mellon's Heinz College. So go with the force, everybody. They're just over there. My question is just like an amalgamation of different thoughts that you've all really had. One of which was they're now building 1 satellite a day through certain factories in Europe, and that out of the $8 billion being spent per annum in Europe on this, euros in this challenge, lion's share is public funds. And what outer space is happening is more for the philanthropists and the billionaires. So I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, what's our return on investment? What exactly is it that we're going to do where there is demand? If there's no demand for satellites because the current supply chain is going to be pumping them out, what is it that we're going to do here that's going to justify public spend? So just kind of putting it out there to get your thoughts while you're all at the table. Thanks.
Well, the issue of return on investment is fundamental for all decision makers. Now, let's say if we characterize the return on investment, we have not to see that purely in economic terms at governmental level. Today, we have, I would say, 3 categories that we can use. Category number 1 is knowledge, scientific knowledge. You cannot measure that in terms of applied research at the very beginning. You work for fundamental research. You move forward the border of knowledge and things are coming out of that. And we have plenty of applications all around us. So there the return is in knowledge. Second is the category you are implicitly addressing as the reference 1, and it is clear for all entrepreneurs, is the economic return on investment that you have to see as a combination of aspects which deal with the capacity to sell, to generate profit, to have a sustainable industry, a business, and users which are also paying users for that. There is a third category which is represented by the strategic interest, because space is also an element of strategic nature. I've been working when I was at the National Space Agency of Italy with a president that used to say, strategic is a kind of wording which is used to say it costs more than necessary. And I love that because there is truth in that. But it's also true that there are things which are strategic and you need to have. Think of many applications that space today has at institutional level for security and defense. There are no doubts. It's an enabler also of a security, be in the activities of intelligence, be in all the activities of deterrence, be in the capacity to defend and also to reply. So we have clearly, and it is the beauty of our society, from knowledge to economy, two strategic matters, there is a mix of return on investment, and it is where governments have to make a choice to create the basis for scientific knowledge, because that is the basis for growth, to create a basis for a sustainable business, but with the ability also to federate the users. And there, a lot can be done. I was discussing that at the table, but I was saying also in my speech, when we are developing things for the European Union, we have the directorate in the European Union which is funding us, which is our customer. But we are targeting much more than that. We are targeting all the many directorate general which exist in the European Union, which can be user. Because institution may be customer, but it's even more important if they're user for their own policies. And then clearly each government has to make its choice about the capacity to defend its own country.
Maybe I can just add a few words, because you know, in CEDA we have what we call ministerial meetings, and those meetings are coming every 3 years, and that's where we put around a large table the ministers of the 22 member states, and we are coming with the program. We are trying to match the needs with the money they have. And that is, the last one was in Lucerne in Switzerland in December. But this time, for this one in December, one of the documents that was really the more, let's say, demanded by the ministers was the report on the socio-economic effects of ESA programs. And that is quite new. First of all, we are working a lot on that to look for all our programs. What are the direct economical and socio-economical effects in Europe? And they are extremely sensitive to that, the decision makers. And I think we have a good case. We have a good case to present. And that is why we are able to attract public funds, because we have a good case, I think.
I'm taking advantage of being up here and answering questions, right? I'm supposed to be facilitating. I think it would be important for South Australia in terms of thinking of its space agency and the areas it focuses on. It brings benefit to the Australian people. I think that's the part that the new space agency and governments going forward are going to have that discussion. Where do we put our investment so that the greater benefit is to our workforce, our capability, and the Australian people? And when you can make that case, then the case is made to invest public investment in that. Absent that, let the entrepreneurs do it, let the billionaires do it, and they'll have enormous benefit for people in many cases. But from the public investment, it really has to be thinking about the benefit to the Australian people.
And then you can use the OECD, because OECD now is working a lot on the socioeconomic benefits derived from space programs. And sometimes when you go to see a minister and you say, this is a study from the OECD, so it's not us that have made the study in order to demonstrate how beautiful we are, it's somebody else who is saying it, sometimes you have a better argument. Huh? And I really encourage you to collaborate with what's going on in the OECD in this domain.
Question right here.
Anne Shaw-Runge, independent consultant interested in these areas, but particularly interested in futures thinking. I wonder if you could reflect on the governance models that exist currently and what you think the governance models might need to be in the future.
Yeah, once we start doing governance,
let's say that I think governance depends also on the context to which it is applied. We have in Europe a particular setup because we have the advantage of, let's say, the European Space Agency as an organization which is intergovernmental, so based on the agreement of multilateral nature, but we have also the European Union, which is a communitarian body, so there it is different, the setup. And we have several national players, which are national agencies in a variety of countries, or are dedicated offices within ministries which are in charge of space. We have a process of procurement which is governed by rules, which is also evolving periodically, and for that we have a good dialogue, in particular between industry and the European Space Agency, but we have as well, in terms of structured dialogue with the Commission, which is a more recent interface in that respect. So in terms of governance, we have a system where substantially each industry is running its own business on its own, with the fact to have an association like the one that I'm representing, which is trying to bring the needs, opportunities, suggestions on behalf of the overall community. But the decisions belong to the states for their national programs, belong to the states for their participation in ESA or in EU programs, because at the end they are decided there, and then it's up to industry to compete. In this respect, let's say we have a relatively plain system of governance. Obviously there are margin for improvements, especially when we talk at European level. The fact that we have two large and important institutional players like ESA and the European Union is something that in terms of governance may demand a certain level of coordination. Some of the programs are even delegated, for instance, to the European Space Agency in terms of management. And that is where, and I was addressing in a room not far from here this morning, this aspect of efficiency in public-private interaction. The governance is very important, and it is important that programs are secured in terms of funding, especially when there is a multi-source of funding or where then face it. Because it's not only important the industry performance in terms of cost, schedule, and technical delivery, but it's important also to have the cost properly mirrored by secured funding for all the duration of the activities.
So one thing I would like to add to that, for space activities, I think you have three characteristics. They are long-term. Therefore, you need to have a financing that is secured long-term. And that's very difficult for governments where the budget is voted every year in the parliament. In ESA, we have found a solution. Each of the ESA program is an international treaty among the participating states to that program. And this international treaty is an obligation for each of the countries. This is why, by the way, ESA is such a reliable partner, because when we start, we have the money to go to the end. But of course, when you think about a country like Australia, that you have to think about it, how to ensure the financing of a long-term program with budget that are voted on a yearly basis. So I think that is an element to reflect. The second element I think is important is that when you are a country of your size, you have to collaborate. You cannot imagine to build a program all alone. You are not the Soviet Union. I mean, you will never do that all alone. So you have to collaborate. But you have collaboration and sovereignty. And there are elements where you want to be able to decide yourself, and there are elements where you're happy to discuss with others, because by joining force you can do more. So you have really to look at the two. That is an important decision, program per program, where to collaborate, where to be a sovereign state. By the way, this was underlined, I think, 4 times by the minister this morning, this question. I think this is an important point. And the third element is a number of the large space ventures are ventures that are proposed by one, but I mean not taken by a number. And when you look at this collaboration, you have a lot of possibilities, and that is, you have a beautiful location for that. You are far from everybody, but at the same time you are dealing with the entire planet. So I think it is very important there to make up your mind and to make up your choices. So those for me are the 3 elements in a government that you should really consider.
So you were asking about norms. Is that what you were asking about? Is that what you said?
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry? Oh, governance,
But
okay.
your bigger picture, world scale element to the question, really.
So, you know,
so that if South Australia is joining, how do we make sure that we've got the world scale governance in
so
place?
one of the things that have been so attractive about space, I think, has been largely the global acceptance that space is for peaceful purposes and is a global asset. And that's been kind of the framework in which most space ventures have been done over the last, I don't know, as long as we've been doing space for the most part, 4 decades or so, 4 or 5 decades. There's also been a lot of, I think there's pretty broad use of things like weather satellites that provide unencrypted information to nations and places that don't necessarily have that capability. So they can do, they can benefit from that as well. That I think is something that enables the kind of cooperation that he talked about here is teaming up and providing, say, for example, you did some kind of weather system, environmental monitoring system. You could team up with other nations, jointly share information and the costs. I mean, these are assets that typically, are, unless you're a geostationary, they tend to be able to sense things going on all over the Earth, as they orbit, and many people can benefit from them.
Okay, that was our last Q&A. I want to be respectful of everyone's time on that, and appreciate the panel and really great questions in that. And for closing, I'd like to introduce David Bond, who is our Chief Operating Officer for BAE Systems. He's going to present the vote of thanks.